Booyah. Episode 4, Non-Fiction.
Hello and welcome to On the Same Page, a podcast in which two mates separated by oceans and hemispheres talk about books and catch each other up on life between the lines. Unfortunately, we can't get together in person, but through this podcast we hope to get on the same page.
Welcome to On the Same Page. My name
back.
is Blake and I'm with Seamus.
Hey,
welcome
how you
back
going?
to episode... I'm good. I'm going very good.
That's good.
I don't know what episode this is. Let's say 4.
Hopefully 4.
I'm
Depending
going to try
on
and stop
technical
talking,
skills.
talking about specifics so that we can kind of throw this audio anyway. But welcome to On the Same Page. Seamus and I will endeavour to get on the same page about non-fiction titles today. Very broad topic. We both
Very
had,
broad.
I think, a fair bit of fun getting our list together.
Had a lot of fun.
How did you approach your list?
Well, it really got me thinking, and I was talking to my girlfriend about it. What defines a non-fiction book? And I guess that's probably a good place to start. I've sort of got my answer. Do you have any initial thoughts off the bat?
I definitely thought about this, especially with one of my selections, but I more or less just defined it as not novels or poetry. Very broadly.
I would agree, but then I was thinking about something, and hopefully this isn't one of your picks, but I don't think it would be, the Iliad, which is essentially an extended song, is considered non-fiction, technically, but it is a story. And it would have been fiction of the day. And so I've decided that a text diverts from fiction to non-fiction in the absence of any other information.
Right. I mean, I think if you've got a text where gods have a hand, then you're in the realm of non-fiction. You're in the realm of fiction.
Fiction, yes.
And I mean, you have, if you've just given away one of yours, I have one which is similarly liminal. It's on the verge, so I think we can let it slide. But yeah, I think when it comes to home, I wouldn't say that's non-fiction. That's too. I mean, we treat it as
non-fiction.
A source. We treat it as a primary source. In
and I guess
history,
basically then every fiction text, or nearly every fiction text, has non-fictive elements in it that you could deduce information from, and maybe not even necessarily related to that text, but it could be language of the day, fashion if it's a movie or something like that, or a TV show, anything like that, technology of the day. That's all stuff that might not relate to the story, but is non-fictive within, and that's when you can use it.
Yeah, the way a bookshop separates is probably the least worst way. You know, I think you would find the Iliad in the fiction section of a bookshop.
You probably would,
but at the same time, I mean, fiction's more true than fact in a lot of ways. You know, in terms of emotional truth, in terms of saying things that you can't say in other situations. So it's grey. It's a grey area.
It's a rabbit hole.
Yep. Alice in Wonderland. Is that fiction? Is that real? Did that really happen? I don't know. The Mad Hatter seems like a pretty genuine guy.
A drug trip.
Yeah. So it's a factual account of an acid trip.
Okay.
And it was also his extremely clever, witty takedown of non-pure mathematics, where you can kind of do anything. And that was his satirical attempt at...
Because he was a mathematician, wasn't he?
Yeah. And I don't think he liked the ways that people were pushing the boundaries of maths. And so he was saying, you can basically do anything with maths now. You can just go down this, jump down a rabbit hole, and then suddenly you're in another part of physics. And it's but that's not how it works.
Yeah.
But well beyond my... I just think it's a nice story about a woman who fell in a hole.
Yes.
And she met Martin Short and Stephen Fry. Great story.
Very good story, yeah. All right, so then what was your first pick then?
My first pick was Cultural Amnesia, Notes in the Margin of My Time by Clive James. The American subtitle was Necessary Memory from History and the Arts. Now, this is like one of the most brilliant books I've ever read. It's big. It's a series of 106 biographical essays on largely 20th century figures, from Louis Armstrong to Jorge Luis Borges to Charles de Gaulle, Goebbels, 4 members of the Mann family, Octavio Paz, Yamamoto, Stefan Zweig, anyone you can think of. A very diverse list, and he's kind of effort. If you don't know Clive James, he died a couple of years ago. Great Australian from Sydney originally, from the kid from Cogra, as he was called. A wit. He was a translator of Dante. He wrote his Unreliable Memoirs series, which kind of rewrote how you could approach memoir. And he had a very loose relationship with fact when it came to his memoirs. Very embellished accounts of his childhood and his days at Cambridge and Sydney University and in Fleet Street. Also a great poet and an amazing essayist. And so in this, and a kind of definitely a 20th century proponent of humanism, and he kind of was. This was his. Beginning of the 21st century, he's saying, here's all the things that we can't forget about the 20th century.
Yeah.
Here's all the necessary memories from politics, art, sociology, philosophy, all these things. And of course, it's all in his style, which is brilliant, witty, insightful. And just because an essay is about Charles de Gaulle doesn't mean he talks about Charles de Gaulle for 10 pages. He can talk about anything. He could jump away and talk about Miles Davis for a while, come back and talk about a film, talk about I don't know, Paul Newman's Eyes or something, or the way Steve McQueen walks, or the scope is fantastic. And even though it's just supposedly 20th century, he does have exceptions. There's a great essay on Tacitus. There's an essay on Montesquieu.
I was just going to say, it sounds similar to like Plutarch's Lives.
Yeah. He doesn't quite cover Lycurgus, and it's a lot funnier than Plutarch's Lives, I guess.
Not difficult.
And it's a lot about style and art and truth and anti-totalitarianism. Where I think in Plutarch there's a kind of I feel a sense that he admires the Spartan lifestyle. He admires aspects of totalitarian and autocratic ideas, or if you can get it right, then it works. He kind of seems to think, but you can't really get it right. And when the Spartans won, things didn't go that well after that. When the Spartans beat the Athenians, I don't know. Maybe it only works on a small scale, the city-state level, which is something that Clive James talks about in the Montesquieu episode, in the Montesquieu essay. The only kind of drawback I'd say is that there's definitely a dearth of females, of women. Yeah. He does have essays on Coco Chanel and Beatrix Potter and Ricarda Hook and Sophie Scholl and 5 or 6 others. And then he readily admits, I think, in the introduction, that it's man heavy. It's a sausage fest.
Yeah.
But he is very sensitive, and with the women that he does touch on, Bethesda Medelstam, Heda Margulis Kovalli, who was the great Czech translator of Saul Bellow and things like that. But yeah, I mean, I think it's brilliant because of its just cohesion of his style, and he talks about it as being his style or the shape of his kind of essay prose as being a single line or argument moving through selected perceptions to a neat conclusion, a trail of clarities variously illuminating a dark sea of unrelenting turbulence like the phosphorescent wake of a phantom ship. Far from a single argument, there would be scores of arguments. I wanted to write about philosophy, history, politics, and the arts all at once. And he kind of does so in every essay. And I won't drag on too long but you know, you can just, the great thing as well, I mean, you can just kind of pick a name. You can be like, actually, I feel like listening to a reading about, Miles Davis, or maybe I'll go with Hitler today. I'm in Hitler mood. But it's always humanistic, and it's always coming to a really like neat conclusion, as he said, and it's always wonderfully diverse and always funny. And so here's a couple of examples. I mean, this one's from an essay on the famously dense and Berlin's own Walter Benjamin, where he's talking about kind of reading Benjamin as a young man. For the semi-educated Beatles period junior intellectual intent on absorbing sociology, philosophy, and cultural profundity all at once and in a tearing hurry, Benjamin's scrappily available writings constituted an intellectual multivitamin pill, the more guaranteed in its efficacy by being so hard to swallow. And then, you know, just the absolute concision that he's able to achieve in terms of the density of a sentence. Like there's an essay on Arthur Schnitzler where he talks about Schnitzler, the Austrian. He talks about, or just this line: "Is stupidity a mere absence of mind, or has it a mind of its own?"
That's nice.
Or this, I love this line: "Hindsight is not a view of the world; it's an indulgence of self."
Yeah,
that one can wreak havoc in your personal life. And this one I think is great as well. Just and obviously it's a great defense for his crazy amount of reading and intellectual achievement, where he's talking about, you know, people who might call him a snob, or people who think that you know, having that range of interests or is superficial. And he says, "Increasing our range need not cost us our focus. Quite the reverse. The person without a range of reference is not more authentically human for being so. He is just more alone." Yeah. Anyway,
some good advice.
And it's a great book. You know, very.
How big is it?
Thick one.
Yeah.
It's big. Yeah, I don't know, maybe 800 pages. Big pages.
Yeah.
I've got a hardcover edition. But you know, each essay is like 10 to 20 pages, the longer
you can
ones.
Just jump in and out of them.
Yeah, so you can just jump in bite-sized one at a time. You know, it's not something that you read back to front. But it's got an amazing, like you said, cohesion of style all to itself.
Yeah.
And that's my number one.
I love it.
So, yeah, what's yours?
I picked the book What is History by E.H. Carr. I feel like it's a bit unknown, but it's a book that I don't think I've ever read it cover to cover. It's a book of sort of individual essays as well. But I read it all through my undergrad and masters, and it's an exploration of sort of historical theory, and it addresses the overarching question of what is history, which is of course the title, which is it's a pretty big question when you start to think about it, and it's something that I hadn't really thought about till I read it. He's got a really good, one of his first examples, just to kick it off, is if you, Blake, you're on the north side of a mountain and I'm on the south side, and we both sketch the mountain, we'll have different sketches of the same mountain. And that's how he's saying what history is just a different collation of views. And like that example itself, I think is just brilliant because, one, it's incredibly simple, but it's also one good life advice in that just because someone else is right, or just because you're right, doesn't mean they're wrong. You know, 1 and 3 make 4, but so does 2 and 2. So I really love it for that. But it's also, it opens your eyes, because just because someone has this view of history doesn't mean that that's the only view of history. And I think that's important, especially because there are some stalwarts of history out there that are unflinching in their opinions, and they would probably benefit reading something like this. very easy to read. It's very, very readable, very accessible. Even if you're not a history lover, it's probably still a very good read because it's not so much concerned with historical fact, but more, of course, the question, what is history? And yeah, you could take anything away from reading this book, absolutely.
And when was it written? What was the...
Oh, I think it's the 60s.
60s. So it's kind of pre or right around the historicism birth.
I can look it up.
Birthday. But that's wonderful. And this is kind of like a guiding text that you always kept by your side during study.
Yeah, I think there's about 15 essays in there, and each one sort of pulls something different from history. But it was very good to read alongside when you're doing history essays to just sort of keep you grounded, keep you reminded to what is history. 1961. But I had to do a couple of essays exploring history as well, so this fitted in perfectly. I could have just submitted this book, though I would have been plagiarized, but it's a very good book.
Nice. How big is it? Is it a chunky... It was just 15 essays, you said?
Yeah, I think it's about 15, so it's like 150, 200 pages. Very small. I've just got a Penguin Classics, one of those orange cover ones, so very easy, very good to draw through. I think mine's just filled with notes and highlighted parts and everything like that. So yeah, great little. Was it something you were
encouraged? Was it something you were encouraged to get when you started undergraduate history, or is it something you found yourself?
It popped up once in my master's as just like you should probably have read this book. I think it's just a book that you fall into naturally. When you're looking through the history section in bookshops, it's always sort of nestled there somewhere, and you just naturally gravitate towards it because of the title. Everyone had heard of it in my degrees, but it was never like a recommended text, and we never studied it specifically.
Mm-hmm. Does anything really stick out? Any of the essays kind of keep coming back to you?
Well, like I think that first one of the mountain is it's probably my favorite because that's on like the third page, and I was like, oh my god, I'd never like considered that aspect of it, about what history is and that you can question it, and that of course there are different views and we're all sketching the same mountain with different opinions and views and everything like that. So yeah, I think that one was just a breakout for me and bit mind opening.
Yeah, and you're kind of sketching the mountain in the dark by like a pale moonlight of hindsight and perspective.
Yeah. You've got one little coin and like a bit of pottery to guide you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that leads nicely into my second, because my second has a good amount of concern for the writing of history and for the profession of being an historian. And that is The Black Jacobins by C.L.R. James, 1938, which is roughly C.L.R. James, who was a Trinidadian political theorist and writer, cricket nut, a very prominent member of the West Indian independence movement in the UK, and a Marxist and a Trotskyist until he met Trotsky and was extremely disappointed in the man he came across, who didn't think could really answer the kind of incisive dialectical questions which C.L.R. James brought to him, and he was like, ooh. An incredible man. He also wrote novels, and he wrote he was a great fan of Melville, and wrote an incredible book about how Melville was basically the philosopher of 20th century political, the savior of 20th century political philosophy. It's called Mariners, Renegades, and Buccaneers, or something like that. Great book. And
we couldn't go an episode without mentioning or alluding to Moby Dick.
That's true. It would be rude, and it wouldn't be part of on the same page, because that's the biggest page there is.
We'll get there one day, listeners. We'll get there one day.
We'll get there one day. But ostensibly, it is a fantastic work of history. I think one of the great works of 20th century history, and it is more or less telling the biography of Toussaint Louverture, the great leader of the Haitian Revolution in the end of the 18th century, around 1790s, one of these great catalytic crucible events in between and amongst the post-American Revolution, the English loss of its major colony in America, the French going into their revolution, British and French at war, and this island in the midst of all of it, which is the biggest gem in all of European imperial possessions, San Domingo, now Haiti and Dominican Republic. And, just this fecund island, which just produced more sugar and stuff for everyone in France, and which, had the most slaves. And Toussaint Louverture, born a slave, and rose to be one of the great tacticians of his age. Also a very smart man, just kind of one of the great men of action of all time. And so this is a kind of account of the whole revolution leading up, including Napoleon, Christophe, Pitt, Dessalines, all these great characters from history. But more or less, it is James kind of at his best, and he did an extraordinary amount of research. And not only is it a book about history, but it kind of made history. It was also one of the books, or one of the real nails in the coffin, although the coffin still hasn't been, unfortunately, closed. I recently heard the coffin being, there is a kind of bullshit trotted out that abolition, particularly in the UK, was fermented by Christian groups mainly, and a lot of them still claim this. And CLR James more or less put it to bed that abolition came to the British Empire for economic reasons. Firstly, Pitt was a fan of Smith. Smith said, put it very basically in The Wealth of Nations, it appears from the experience of all ages and nations that the work done by free men comes cheaper in the end than the work performed by slaves. And it seems obvious now that if you pay people, they buy things, and the market grows. That's just capitalism 101. Yeah. And just that the whole thing was just the stupidest economic idea. And also, Pitt realised that 50% of the slaves that the British were bringing into their colonies, they were actually selling on to the French, who they were at war with. So it just made no sense. It made absolutely no sense. I love that. And so Pitt came to that, and then Pitt put charged Wilberforce with pushing the abolition movement at home, and eventually it came, and that kind of led to a lot of, the story of Toussaint Louverture, the story of the destiny of 3 continents, basically. And but James is just such a master historian and storyteller, and he has a lot to say about the art of history. But this is a guy who he's just such great style. He begins a chapter which is entitled "The Mulattoes Try and Fail." He begins the chapter with 3 words: "Eminence engenders enemies," and then that's it.
I'd say that 3 times fast.
Eminence engenders enemies. So yeah, he's and he also he also does a lot of, this is written in the mid 1930s, published in 1938. He foresees a lot of what happens in Europe. He perceives the rise of Hitler. He perceives a lot of what's going to happen. And his real kind of, I guess, guiding principle for the book is that there is no drama like the drama of history. And and this is a great line about the difference between modern historians and traditional historians. Your Herodotus and your Thucydides and your Suetonius and whoever else. Such elementary conceptions lend themselves willingly to narrative treatment, and from Tacitus to Macaulay, from Thucydides to Green, the traditionally famous historians have been more artist than scientist. They wrote so well because they saw so little.
Yeah, that's true.
The writer has sought not only to analyse but to demonstrate in their movement the economic forces of the age, their moulding of society and politics, of men in the mass and individual men, the powerful reaction of these on their environment at one of those rare moments when society is at boiling point and therefore fluid. And he kind of sets up everything from there. The analysis is the science, and the demonstration the art, which is history. Yeah, he has all these, great lines like this, which, this is another good one. It is the privilege of historians to be wise after the event, and the more foolish the historian, the wiser he usually aims to be.
Yeah. That's nice.
Yeah, it's just a great book, and I think it should be read by everyone who's interested in the course of Western civilization, what happened, the Enlightenment, the various revolutions, and of course, the French Revolution didn't last. It's fallen over about 4 different times.
Yep.
The American Revolution is still going on. It's been tested extraordinarily. Probably hasn't been tested as much as it is today since the Civil War. And perhaps the same could probably be said to Haiti, who is in a fair bit of strife as well at the moment. Assassination of a president. But it's just a great book, and it's a great viewing a historian and a writer kind of at their peak. Just as a last kind of line, this is probably my favorite line from the whole book. When history is written as it ought to be written, it is the moderation and long patience of the masses at which men will wonder, not their ferocity. Which in a great history of a slave revolution is a very insightful line. So that's The Black Jacobins. Yeah, great book.
So how old were you when you were reading that?
I think I read that maybe when I was in my early 20s. I had read C.L.R. James's memoir, Beyond a Boundary, which is kind of about growing up in Trinidad as a cricket nut. He talks about from his the reading room of his parents' house, which just had a small bookshelf and then a window. You could see directly down the umpire's view of the wicket, so that he could tell as he was reading Vanity Fair as an 8-year-old whether someone got LBW or not. He was like, "Nah, yeah, that was LB, that wasn't." And it's a nut. And then he eventually moves. This is in the early 30s. Eventually moves to Britain. He moves to a place called Nelson with Constantine, the great West Indian captain Constantine. He was kind of the first West Indian to go and play county cricket in the UK. This is kind of around Garfield Sober's era. Yep. And you just and you get the early days of the West Indian independence movement, but you more or less just get this great memoir of a young man growing up in Trinidad, a very kind of talented intellect, and how everything happened. And it's also just a kind of ode to cricket. And so I read that, and I thought it was amazing. And then I'd read his kind of magnum opus, which is The Black Jacobins, which is still a great.
Is it really dense? Because early 20s is quite young to be reading something that sounds incredibly dense.
But like I said, he just has he's such a great stylist, such a great writer that even when he's at his densest and, he's really going into historical records and, he always keeps the story going. He always keeps the personal element of Toussaint or Dessalines or whatever's going on in sight. His research was immaculate, and it was just, I found it relatively easy to read. And it wasn't that I'd been reading a lot of modern history books. It was just that it was so well written, and it was and it was so gargantuan. It wasn't like, oh, you're reading a book about kind of an event in modern history. You're kind of reading the event which was the crucible for modern history, almost in a way. This was the point. It decided. The American Revolution was also another big one, but this decided Napoleon. Napoleon was so outwitted by Toussaint Louverture during the Revolution. That was why he sold Louisiana, because he needed money to fight the British, because the slaves were beating him in his own colony. So that's why basically America started. That's why America got half of the continent. That's why the British were able to keep their colonies. That's why the course of Indian history changed so much. Not just West Indian, but also the Indian subcontinent's history and Britain's relationship there, refocusing its attentions on there in the Victorian period. French history, everything. And Napoleon kind of was decided by this slave uprising and eventual republic, founding of a republic in the West Indies. And so it's just the scope of it is so gargantuan that it just kind of I couldn't put it down. It was, and my book was just full of notes and highlighting passages and crazy.
Well, it was just funny because you were saying it was so influential on so many things, and you said the Napoleon slave uprising, and just because 2 weeks ago I mentioned Count of Monte Cristo and Alexander Dumas' father was stripped of his rank in as an officer and returned to a slave, and then that gave rise to Alexander's desire to write a revenge story. So even that has been influenced.
Yeah, I mean, that's in there.
Leslie,
That's where I learnt about that. He talks about that. He probably has a whole chapter on that. I can't remember exactly, but that's definitely where I heard about that. It's where I first probably heard of Dumas. It's where I first heard of the Dreyfus affair. It's where I first heard of someone outwitting Napoleon before Wellington and Napoleon's lies, Napoleon's nefariousness, and how Toussaint eventually came to Napoleon's custody after a long time. But it's just an amazing story, and it has so many twists and turns and so much influence on the history of everything in the West, and in particularly America. Also, Australian history was linked to all this. I mean, all colonial history kind of is linked to this event.
Yeah.
And the history of Haiti since has kind of been linked to it as well, because it's been artificially contained and held in destitution for all these years. And yet they haven't given up their origins, which is this kind of origin story.
Yeah. Well, brilliant second pick.
Yeah. Thank you. And on to yours.
SPQR, Mary Beard.
Ooh,
yeah. I love Mary Beard. I love Roman history, so naturally I love this book. It's, for those of you that don't know, SPQR is Senatus Populus K Romanos, the Senate for the People of Rome. It's a book that covers all Roman history up until, I think it's up until Constantine, maybe a bit further actually. But it's a wonderful introduction to Roman history, essentially. She doesn't shy away from any of the truth. She definitely embellishes in the darker, more gory, but also the hedonistic nature of what Rome became. I mean, I love Mary Beard. I think she's a genius, and we're so lucky to be living as she is living as well, and still producing stuff as well. Even if you're not a fan of reading, go watch some of her lectures. She's got that fantastic one with Boris Johnson.
Yeah,
The Intelligence Squared.
So good.
I love that. She's battling for Rome. He's battling for classical Greece. That's a fun hour and a half. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the whole Parliament can't seem to get a word in against Boris Johnson in his political career, but Mary Beard puts him in his place.
Yeah.
I mean, Boris Johnson, in his defence, does a fairly good job of making the point for ancient Greece as belligerently as he does, and as he sticks to his
Boris
points.
Johnson way.
Yeah, in his very Boris Johnson way, and he's very he doesn't accept much nuance, and then he's always just like, but the gladiatorial games and aren't they maniacal, and it's not a very good Boris Johnson impression, but it's I don't think you can do a good Boris Johnson impression in the audio medium, because you need to have a mop of hair. Yeah. But it's it's a great debate, and they also I love those debates where they have actors because they're doing recitations of Juvenal and Sappho, and it's a great debate. And Mary Beard has so many good documentaries and stuff I've watched. I mean, I read a small book she wrote about Medusa and
Women in Power.
Women in Power.
Yeah, I've read that one as well. That's also brilliant.
But I
love that one as well.
I've been wanting to jump into one of these her big Roman histories, because I've watched a lot of the docos, and I think so SPQR sounds
correct.
Just amazing. Have you did you listen to an audio as well, or did you
No, I've got the book. I haven't actually read the whole thing because it spans such a large time period that it just gets to the point that it's not the area that I'm well versed in. And history is big enough that I can't be bothered basically to learn more about, even though I know it interests me, but I can't be bothered to learn more about a period that isn't my period as well, because there's too much, and you've sort of got to draw a line somewhere. But it's fantastic. She starts off with Cicero, talking about Cicero, and then she launches into the foundation back in 753 BC, and then works her way forward from there up until, I believe it's Constantine in about 330 AD.
Old Constantine, God, giving in to the whims of his army and
boiling his wife alive.
Well, I mean, that's okay, but but I draw the line at declaring Christianity the sole religion of the Roman Empire. But you can boil chicks if you need to.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, he was a madman.
I mean, weren't they all? I mean, that's also the great thing. I mean, that's what keeps you coming back to Roman history. It's the feast, the hedonistic feast, the maniacal tricks that the emperors would play, and on unwitting guests and people who were, too afraid to even eat the food, but couldn't also not eat the food because it would be rude. Oh God, you hear all
it was
stories.
Rude not to vomit at a dinner party.
Oh yeah, and then they even have a vomitorium or something. One of the emperors had.
It's not a vomitorium. I think it was just called a bucket, because I know a vomitorium is the what would you call it? The hallway in like the Colosseum kind of stadium things, and like all the people would funnel into it, and that's where you'd be vomiting into the.
Oh,
yeah,
that's good.
And so that's the vomitorium. So because I remember I looked into it because someone told me that fact, and I was like, oh, I don't think that's right, and I think it like was just called a bucket that they'd vomit into.
Wow. God.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good one. So I imagine it's quite a thick. I mean, I've seen it innumerable times in shops, but I've never picked it up. 600
to 800 pages, I think. Probably about 600-700, I think. But yeah, it's good. She's got a lot of chapters, a lot of sections, so you don't have to read it cover to cover. You can just go to your time period and read that. But there's something, it's worthwhile. She captures the intricacies of Roman life quite well.
Would that be your favourite secondary source on Rome? I mean, outside of Romans themselves.
She's probably my favourite living secondary source. Probably doesn't even have to be living, to be fair, but yeah, she's probably up there with my favourite source to go to. I think this book probably not as much, because it is an overview. Something like Women in Power is a bit more concentrated, and a documentary is a bit more concentrated. So this is a great introduction into Roman history, or a great refresher. But yeah, I mean, it's brilliant. She's brilliant. I love her.
Yeah. And I mean, I've only read that one small book, but she does write the way she speaks, which is what you also want from a writer, and in nonfiction. I think that really helps. Yeah, because she has a distinctive voice and a distinctive way that she speaks.
She's just so calm.
Yeah, and authoritative.
Yeah. But like in the interview with Boris Johnson, like he's just sort of fumbling around in his Boris Johnson way, and she just sits there so reserved and just waits her time, and then just gets up and slays.
Slays. Yes, Mary did. Yeah, she kills it. Oh god. Yeah. Good stuff. SPQR. That's your number 2. All right. So on to my number 3. And my number 3 is Colour, A Natural History of the Palate by Victoria Finlay, which is a great... I don't actually know what year this was published, but recently, in the last decade or so, I guess. Victoria Finlay is a British journalist. I think she started originally in maybe economics journalism in Hong Kong or something like that, and then she kind of gradually shifted into arts journalism and then into writing about art. And then she wrote this great... she started going on all these adventures in her art journalism, and, she went all over the world, and, she uses these stories to kind of tell the history of art history usually, I mean, I think she says at some point, art history is so often about looking at the people who make the art, but I realized at that moment there were also stories to be told about the people who made the things that made the art. And, she talks about going to Afghanistan and going into, lapis lazuli mines and, where these precious blue rocks would be eventually transported to Venice and, into Renaissance art, at that point, extremely expensive pigments, but then you could also make, every Madonna could have this stunning blue dress and, Giotto's dream of indigo in all of Giotto's ceiling skies. And it's, insane to think that blue is like obviously just one of these colors which doesn't seem to occur naturally. And there's very few, I think there's like 2 fish that have natural blue pigment. Usually blue, when you see it naturally, is an illusion.
And I think there's no fruit that's blue.
Yeah, it's just such an unusual thing. And I mean, the Greeks didn't even have a name for blue, and lots of cultures don't. Which is kind of boggling because the sea is blue and the sky is blue. And how could you miss that guy? How could you miss that one, guys? Like, what fuck word did you use? But to them, it was almost kind of like ubiquitous to the point of like beyond having a name. I don't know. It's like calling
we can't replicate.
It's like saying air has a color. I guess I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But it's an amazing book, and she goes in outback Australia, and she's uncovering all the great ochre trade lines that the Indigenous Australians used to have, and the uses of ochre, lapis lazuli and red matter. And she tells them, brilliant stories, and it's full of. I'm a little art history nut, and I love all these little tidbits of where color comes from, and Indian yellow comes from cows that eat mango leaves, and then they take like the urine and they boil down the urine to get Indian yellow.
Oh my goodness! Yeah.
They get. And all these great tidbits about, certain pigments. One of my favorite ones, I think I remember. Well, actually, I mean, here's a good quote, which I thought I'd read out. What is important to remember about chemical coloring is that the light actually does affect the object. When light shines on a leaf or a daub of paint or a lump of butter, it actually causes it to rearrange its electrons in a process called transition. There the electrons are, floating quietly in clouds within their atoms, and suddenly a ray of light shines on them. Imagine a soprano singing in high C and shattering a wine glass because she catches its natural vibration. Something similar happens with the electrons if a portion of light happens to catch their natural vibration. And that's what bursts out when you see blue in a Monet, when you see red in a Velázquez. It's why it pops is because they've managed to get this pigment so precise. I think you just get this precise octave of visible light that some painters been able to really capture, and in some it really does vibrate and pop out to you in some paintings. I was in the Mauritius House in The Hague recently, and Girl with a Pearl Earring and other Vermeers and Rembrandts, and Rembrandt isn't particularly known for his colours. His colours are more subtle and shadowy, but Vermeer is, the blues and the yellows are stunning. Yeah. And they really pop out at you from across a room where another painting will just kind of be a glaze. That's one of my favourite facts from the book is Finlay's talking about a colour known as madder red. Madder, M-A-D-D-E-R, red. I think it's also called rose madder in some circles. Yeah. And it's what's known as a fugitive colour, a colour that fades and changes over time. Oh. And that if you look at a painting like Van Gogh's White Roses, which is in the National Gallery in Washington, D.C., it was called White Roses belatedly, or after the fact. But actually, in the 1990s, they discovered that the pigment had actually red matter in it. And so when Van Gogh painted it, it would have been pink roses. But now, it completely changes your idea of what it looks like. And I think now they've even retitled it to Pink Roses.
Retitled the retitle.
Yeah. But, I love those little facts. And, and she's a brilliant writer, and she it's a real journalistic account as well. So, she is going... even just the story of how she gets into Afghanistan in the late 90s is like a big deal, and she has to wait in Pakistan for days on end for a contact to come, and then there's a whole thing, and then she eventually, there's drama, really good storytelling, and it's just so much to learn. It's brilliant about lots of different cultures, lots of different art history facts, lots of different, it's a good popular science book as well, because you learn about pigments and color theory and all that stuff, which I love. But yeah, Color, Victoria Finlay, fantastic book.
Because I think I've heard of this before. I think someone's mentioned it. It might have even been you a while ago. When did you read this?
I read this recently. I read this maybe this year, last year. I don't know. Hard to tell. I read it on my phone, so nice. I don't really.
Oh yeah, yeah, okay, yeah.
I don't know exactly when I read it, but yeah, maybe a year ago or 9 months ago. And
is it a big book?
Yeah, it's quite long. I don't know. I'd say it took me a while to read it. I guess maybe 500 pages. I guess I've never seen it actually in IRL, in real life.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a big one. But again, like all good big non-fiction books, it does, and not all good big, but a good touch is that you can just jump in. You can just go to the Australian ochre section. You can just go to the Afghanistan lapis lazuli section. You can just, and then you've got a certain chunk which you can just jump into, which I really liked.
Yeah.
And yeah, loved it. Really good book.
I guess it's just fun, like, because last week I was talking about the book Perfume by Patrick Suskind, and how it made me think about how perfume used to be this big process to create it, and it was so sought after and such a high class thing, which is just something we don't think about anymore. And color's just another one of them. Like, you go into any shop, Big W or anything like that, and there's just paint everywhere. Like, you go into Bunnings, there's tins of paint anywhere. They can make up any color, and you just don't think about that kind of stuff anymore. So yeah.
No,
reading about the origins would be sick.
We really are so privileged in the senses these days that we don't, people didn't see blue in art that much. People didn't, the Egyptians had a little bit, but, it really wasn't until the Renaissance that you really had, at least in Western art, these strong blues coming through, and other really vibrant colors were things that people only really saw in nature. And and even, into the 20th century, you think about film, it wasn't until Technicolor and Color came along that you even saw kind of color in film, and that people would see that on the big screen, and how much of a effort that took. And famous scenes, like Wizard of Oz, when Judy Garland opens the door and, she's suddenly in color, in Technicolor.
Yeah.
Although I recently found out that they actually, Technicolor cameras were so big and such an effort, and it was such a big thing, and the sets had to be they were 100 degrees, and it was intense. But they couldn't actually, they actually painted the whole set sepia for the previous scene before she opens the door.
Oh,
so they was still shot with a Technicolor camera, but they just painted the whole scene sepia color, and they'd painted. It wasn't even. The woman who opens the door isn't Judy Garland. It's her stunt double, and they even painted her dress sepia color. And so you don't see her. She kind of opens the door with her back to camera, and then pulls out of screen, and then Judy Garland in the normal blue dress comes out. And yeah, so just, I don't know. Color is it was a luxury for so long, and now it's just so ubiquitous that we don't think about it. That you can go into anywhere, and a supermarket is one of the most colourful places on earth, and yet it's the most dull. We don't really realise. But yeah, and I guess reading colour really gives you a lot of insight into the amount of effort that it takes colour to get onto a canvas, and especially when you go into museums and you see, particular colours and the nuance in certain colours. When you see a Giotto and there's blue in it, how hard that blue was to get, and how much effort. Even once you got the lapis lazuli, you had to break it down physically with mortar and what's the other part of a mortar called?
Pestle
and mortar for a week until you got it into a fine grain, and then you still had to do work, and then eventually you got a daub of paint and you did that. And so that's how much someone wanted to express the emotion of blue on the Madonna. or in a sky. You know, and
all the unsung heroes of the art world.
Oh yeah, brilliant. And that's
Yeah.
So it really gives you such a kaleidoscope of perspective.
Yeah.
And I love as far as nonfiction books go, it really gives so much more to the world of fiction and the world of art and other things, which that's why I go to it, I guess, a lot now.
Brilliant.
So what was your fourth pick,
Great.
sir?
This is my third. Oh, is it? Wait, third?
No, I think you must be.
Yeah, third.
Yeah,
my third. Letters to a Young Poet, Rainer Maria Rilke. I couldn't go past it. Yeah. We briefly mentioned it last week or the week before. It's a collection of 10 letters. They're an essay, mini essays, I guess, because they're not particularly long. But they're brilliant. Rainer Maria Rilke was writing to, I don't even know his name, some other poet that was struggling at the time. I believe they never actually met in real life. And Rilke's just giving him advice in these 10 letters that somehow, well, not somehow, they're brilliant, but just transcend time and apply themselves to any kind of budding artist out there, or even if you're not an artist, just someone perhaps feeling a bit lost. They ground you, but they lift you up. They're beautiful, transient yet transcendent, poetic. The prose is fantastic. They're informative. They're deeply personal. They're rich. They explore some great ideas. Yeah, I believe you've read it as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, similar experience of profundity with Rilke and with the letters, and as a young poet, obviously felt incredibly directly addressed, and a lot of the emotional turmoil and internal pressure of a young artist, and is I don't know, not allayed or salved or anything, but you get a brother in arms. You get someone to tell you that those emotions and that pressure you're feeling is part of it, and that, I mean, the only real depressing part of it is that I can't remember the poet's name, but he doesn't even become a poet, really. I mean, he doesn't go on with it.
No, he doesn't. He doesn't really get anywhere. Yeah,
I think he read the letters that he got and was like, "Ooh, yeah, I'm not going to be as good as that, so I think I'll give up."
Well, I think he compiled them and published them.
Oh, really?
I think he's the one that actually published them. So I think he was like, "Oh, I'm sitting on a gold mine. I'm just going to do this."
Yeah,
and took him and ran.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess it's some of the most. It's probably Rilke's most read work. I haven't read much else Rilke apart from some of the poems, obviously.
Some poetry,
The Panther, and he also wrote a great little book of sketches, letters, writings on Sagan, which are also very good. And he knew all those guys, and he knew Rodin, and he was hanging out in Paris, and
they all were
in that golden period. If you've seen Midnight in Paris, and Owen Wilson's always, wanting to get back to the 1920s, and then he goes back there and he meets Marion Cotillard. Marion Cotillard wants to go back to the 1890s. That was her golden period. That's when Rodin and all these guys were in Paris.
And then he has his epiphany.
Yeah, there's always a bigger boat. There's always another period. There's always a bigger fish. There's always a brighter golden age, and it's a fantastic book, and I don't know where I've got all my notes written up on a document somewhere, and I go into it for, I think I was saying in a previous episode that I used to have a little post-it with Il fait toujours travail or something to keep, always work, which was
always be working.
Advice to Rilke. Just keep going, and that's at some point the real advice you need. I can't remember. I think it was I was reading. When I was looking for quotes from Cultural Amnesia, I read one of his anecdotes about Jean Cocteau, and Jean Cocteau once said that you can't give advice to a young artist. You can only open the door and show them the tightrope. And that's kind of Rilke doesn't try and solve the riddle. He doesn't solve the puzzle. He tries to show that the riddle can't really be solved. There's just the struggling with it, and the struggle is more or less its own reward eventually. If you can kind of turn that pressure into diamonds or
into a diamond, yeah.
I mean, I don't even think that's how carbon works, but still, the metaphor works that way.
He's got this one nice line, which is probably my favourite. To be an artist means not to calculate and count, to grow and ripen like a tree, which does not hurry its flow of its sap, and stands at ease in the spring gales without fearing that no summer will follow. It will come. And it's just so simple. It's just it, like you say. It's work, but don't rush it. It'll come. If you're an artist, it's a necessity, and it will come, and you will produce in time. But you've got to give it the time. You've got to give it the love to produce.
Exactly. It takes faith and trust, and love is the only really place you can get enough of that to survive on. Yeah, God, it's such a great book, and it's so accessible. And
it's so small as well.
It's short, it's letters. And I think we definitely need to do an episode just on letters. I don't know if you've seen, there's a great YouTube channel of people reading letters.
I haven't.
Benedict Cumberbatch reads one, or Stephen Fry, or Mariam Margulis, or whoever, actors and people who have great letters. And it could be letters from people they know, World War I soldiers, from great writers, anything, just good letters. And they just get up on stage at these events in the UK by the looks of it and read them. And I love letters, and I love writers' letters. And I nearly selected either something from Patrick White's letters, or D.H. Lawrence's letters, or Keats's letters. Keats's letters are amazing. And I was with you when I bought my copy of Keats's letters in Berlin at the Another Country bookshop. And then we went to that bar, and we drank for a long period of time.
8 hours.
Something like that. It's a good session, very 1890s style. And probably that bar is from the 1890s, to be honest.
It was a bit dingy. It was a bit dark.
It's a dingy old Berlin bar in Bergman Keats. But I've since read those letters. Keats's letters are amazing. And spoiler alert, if we do an episode on letters, Keats's letters will be in there. I think we definitely could, and you can pick Rilke again, and we can talk about it again. Rilke's just they're brilliant letters, and they're going to survive forever because they address the tribulation, they address the whole thing. Because Rilke also isn't, he isn't like, oh, I'm established, I've got this, I'm telling you how it's done. Rilke's like, shit, bro, I know, like I'm going through it, like I'm struggling as well. I don't have anything going for me. I'm not successful. I'm not making money from this. I'm still going from castle to castle on other rich donors' goodwill and wanting to be associated with me because I managed to get myself a bit of a name. It's a great thing. It's a great book for not just every artist or every poet to read, but also just any young person. It should be mandatory reading for people in high school for sure.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
Considering the amount of trash they give high school students, they should give them Letters to a Young Poet.
Yeah. And it's short as well, considering high school students don't want to read thick books.
Yeah, very
I think it's like 50 pages or something like that. I've got it in a little black, one of those black classics, the really small ones, whatever they're called, the pocketbook classics or something. Yeah.
Good stuff. That's a good one. Oh, God. Well, my fourth pick is, just trying to get a bit of everything. So I've gone for a popular science book, probably the first popular science book I ever read, which is The Dragons of Eden, Speculations on the Evolution of Human Intelligence by Carl Sagan, 1978. Nice. My man Carl Sagan. I love that man. And I read a lot of his popular science books, and of course loved Cosmos, and Neil deGrasse Tyson has recently rebooted it, but sorry Neil, who I once shook his hand, so I have.
Really?
I did. He came into Hemingway's bar in Manly where I worked, and
did he?
Had a meal and some French fries with his wife and son, and then I had tickets to see him speak at an Intelligence Squared event in Sydney like a few days afterwards, and I was like, And I was telling everyone I worked with, I was like, oh my God, it's Neil deGrasse Tyson. They're like, who the fuck is Neil deGrasse Tyson? I was like, that guy fucker is, dude. He's the director of the Hayden Planetarium, you absolute, like, ignoramuses.
Yeah.
And they're like, go speak to him. And I was like, no, like, he's having a nice, he's just here on vacay. Like, he doesn't want to be disturbed. And then I was like, but maybe he'll come up and pay. But then his wife came up and paid. And I was like, but she was very nice, so I couldn't hate her. And then as they were about to leave, I was just kind of chilling there. And then he kind of gets up and he's opened the door for his family to walk out. And he kind of just gives a wave to say goodbye. He's like, cheers, thanks, whatever he said. And I was like, well, thanks, Mr. Tyson. I'll see you on Thursday or whenever his event was. And he was like, oh, really? And then he walked back across the bar and like reached out and shook my hand and I melted. That's my story.
Damn. That's a good story.
It's good. And then, I went and saw him speak and it was really good. So I do love myself some Neil deGrasse. But as Neil deGrasse Tyson would readily admit, Carl Sagan was the OG for kind of popular astrophysicists.
Yep.
And, it's a great book. Like Cosmos, Carl Sagan has this wonderful, ability to write not only scientifically, but also with great style and attention to beauty. I think he has, what's an example I can do here? Here's a quote. And after we returned to the savannas and abandoned the trees, did we long for those great graceful leaps and ecstatic moments of weightlessness in the shafts of sunlight on the forest roof? Or it is very difficult to evolve by altering the deep fabric of life. Any change is likely to be lethal, but fundamental change can be accomplished by the addition of new systems on top of old ones. Thus, evolution by addition and the functional preservation of the pre-existing structure must occur for one of two reasons. Either the old function is required as well as the new one, or there is no way of bypassing the old system that is consistent with survival. So I think I read this book maybe as a teenager, and it definitely informed just kind of getting a basic grasp of evolution and just kind of getting an introduction to science, because I really didn't vibe well with science at school, but definitely found it when I was given it in the right medium by someone who's passionate and by someone who, firstly, the fact that he just has this beautiful baritone voice that is kind of like hypnotic. If you listen to Carl Sagan speak, or people would have heard the pale blue dot speech on YouTube or something like that. We are a mote of dust in a sunbeam, or he also wrote fiction. He wrote a great science fiction book called Contact, which was eventually made into a film with Jodie Foster. And the book itself, Contact, is a great book.
Have you read it? Yeah,
I have. It's annoying that he wrote a book of fiction, science fiction that good. Genuinely a good work of fiction. But he wrote several of these popular science books. Brocker's Brain was another one, and Dragons of Eden was the kind of start. And it really started popular science reading for me, which I really liked. And the fact which got me most excited was him talking about human intelligence and whether human intelligence is related to brain size. People think you have a bigger brain, you should be more intelligent. And he presents the fact that we have the brains in jars of Lord Byron and of Anatole France. Lord Byron, great romantic poet. Anatole France, great French writer, won Nobel Prize. Anatole France's brain is exactly half the size of Byron's. Byron's was double the size. You can't say he was doubly as intelligent. Maybe you could say he was a better poet. I don't know. I can't read Anatole France in the original French, but I've read his criticism. Obviously a very good writer and a very good wit. But, brain size, there's something more mysterious about it. There's something more mysterious in the evolution of the human brain that isn't just down to size of someone's brain or how it interacts.
It's what you do with it. Size doesn't matter.
Size doesn't matter, guys, unless we're talking about...
It's how you use it.
Yeah, it was a great book, and Carl Sagan, brilliant writer and presenter, and it really kind of turned me on to science and things at kind of the end of my schooling, where I had definitely been wasted in science class. I think in science class, I remember I had a science teacher called Mr. Lee, and he was a lovely man, but I interrupted the class so much that, and his thing was, he would say irrelevant, whenever I interrupted the class with jokes or whatnot, or comments upon whatever he was saying or doing. Blake, irrelevant. And at one point, he, after I got sent out of class a few times, he came outside and he was like, okay, Blake, if you can concentrate and be well behaved in your seat at the front where you're not near everyone, I'd already been moved, then you can have a few minutes at the end of the class to do whatever you want, to say whatever you want. And so I got a little 3 to 4 minute kind of stand-up segment at the end of, and I don't know if your science classes, but our science classes were like pharmacies. How for some reason pharmacists are always a step above everyone else in their shops.
Yeah.
Our science classes had the same thing. That has a step, so you got to have a little stage, and then I got to basically, I would just sit there and I would concentrate on the class because I'd make notes about things I wanted to make comments upon, and then I would get up there and have a little, stand up
little rant.
Do
you know what you were ranting about? Can you remember?
No, I can't remember. I only think I took the opportunity a couple of times, but because I was more someone who yells out in class and is a bit ADHD or whatever. It's not that they have to make their point. It's just that they're sparking and they need to let out some energy somehow, and so it comes out in comments and jokes about things and whatever. But so I wasn't really turned on, but then coming across Carl Sagan, and not that I'm a scientist or anything now, but it definitely opened up my eyes to things which I wish I'd come across earlier.
Yeah, definitely. That's really nice. Because, I know the school education system is a bit dodgy when it comes to these things, and they don't really encourage the best of people. So how old were you? 16, 17?
Yeah, probably around.
Or was this proper 18 right at the end?
Or maybe I can't really remember. I mean, it was I definitely discovered Carl Sagan on YouTube, discovered Cosmos. So I must have been, YouTube was a thing. So I might have been 15, 16, 17. But yeah, and then I went and found the book somewhere. It's I don't know, 250 pages, something like that. Not like a massive book, but yeah, just a real kind of overview of what was then in the late 70s ideas about human intelligence and Darwinian evolution and kind of, and it was also talking about lots of different things. So yeah, I don't know. It was good, and it definitely turned me on to a genre of books which I hadn't thought about. I didn't think that kind of stuff could be interesting. It always seemed to me it seemed like a textbook affair, and textbooks were terrible. Textbooks were just something that you could draw like Hitler moustaches on and dicks. I didn't know that they were interesting.
Yeah, because I nearly picked, and it might not be similar, but I nearly picked Sapiens.
Right, yeah.
So it's probably lucky I didn't pick it, because it sounds like it would have been pretty similar.
I mean, I think that was a lot more. I mean, I wasn't alive. I mean, actually, The Dragons of Eden did win the Pulitzer in 1978. So it was. People realised at the time that it was a good popular science book. But Sapiens is a kind of phenomenon. I mean, I think I'm the only person who hasn't read it. I'm pretty sure.
Probably.
And the only reason I haven't read it is because everyone seems to have read it, and I've listened to Harari talk about it on enough shows and podcasts that I kind of got the gist. So I was like, all right, save myself some time there.
Yeah, it's another big book. I think that's a good 800 pages or something.
Yeah, but I think I might, maybe I'll dip in, because people really froth. And it's always at secondhand bookshops. You can always find a copy of Sapiens for €2.
And you can dip in and out like every other book, as you were saying. But yeah, just a chapter at a time. It's good. But that is not a pick.
Okay.
That is not a pick.
What is it?
My fourth pick, this is my last pick as well, because I only prepared 4, is Depression by William Styron.
Oh.
I believe it's let's call it one essay of about 60, 70 pages. But I believe it's part of a larger story that I didn't actually read. This just came in the form of a vintage mini. But it's a memoir that Styron wrote on how he overcame the disorder, depression, in his mind, and it's how he struggled with it and how he denied it. And as a writer, he sort of threw himself into drinking because he thought that was the thing to do. And so it's this incredibly dark story because he he's getting to the point where he wants to kill himself, and he talks about it. So it's very frank. And the sad thing is, or the good thing is, because he doesn't kill himself, is that it's beautifully written, and you kind of forget that it is a non-fiction text. You think you're reading a story, and it's this really beautiful, depressing story, but in the end, it turns out to be he manages to beat it, and it's fantastic because it's this incredibly dark story that gives you a little bit of hope at the end. And when I was looking at it, I was just looking it up online the other day, and so many people were like, I read this when I was suffering as well, and it just gave me that little bit of hope, because he had that little bit of hope and he managed to beat it. And that's all it sort of takes for some people, just that tiny bit of hope, or to empathize with someone else going through something similar, to help them in that situation. But it's deeply personal inflection of his battles with depression. It's philosophical, it's rich, it's human, it's poetic. I got a couple of quotes here. Death, as I have said, was now a daily presence blowing over me in cold gusts. And I was like, oh, it's so beautiful, but it's so depressing. A melodrama in which I was the victim to be of self-murder, was both the solitary actor and lone member of the audience. And that, I feel like that just sort of sums up suicide perfectly. You are the actor, the audience, everyone involved. And then the last quote, no more words, an act, I'll never write again. And I was just like, yeah, shit. And like, I loved it. It was just so rich, and like I said, it was just so beautifully written that you forget that it is his life, but that makes it all the more richer in itself.
Oh God, I've never read this book. I think it sounds like something I definitely am going to read. I haven't read that much Styron. I only recently read Styron earlier this year because Styron was a great friend of James Baldwin, and actually Styron let Baldwin stay in his guest house to finish writing Another Country, and because Baldwin had nowhere to go, and they were great friends, and that kind of led me to read some sections of Confessions of Nat Turner, but and Baldwin was a fan of Confessions of Nat Turner, which is also very interesting because he was such a famously non-fan of Uncle Tom's Cabin. Oh God, thank you. Anyway, but I have heard about this book when I was doing my research, and it seemed very interesting. So I'm glad you picked that. When did you read this?
Oh, last year? Yeah, 2020 would have been last year. So pretty recent. I just stumbled across it in a bookshop. It was a vintage mini. So it was like $5 or something like that. Just picked up and read the first page and thought it sounded very nice, very dark, very beautiful. And so I bought it and went with it. I hadn't heard of William Styron up until that point. I hadn't read any of him. I haven't read any of him since either, but that's not because I'm avoiding him. I just haven't come across him yet. So yeah, only last year.
Do you think it was something that you just spontaneously came across, or it was something you needed at the time?
I think I was in a bit of a short book phase, and I think then naturally I turned to sort of thinner penguins or the vintage minis or the little black penguins, something like that, just to give you a teaser into to other writers. I think they're very good for expanding your readership, because you can dip into so many writers so quickly and so easily. And I think it was basically just there was nothing else there that really interested me, and I hadn't heard of Styron. It was about depression. I feel like that's relatable for everyone in some sense, somewhere, at some point in their life. So I was just intrigued as to what it was about, and it did not disappoint.
Nice. Oh God. How long is it? It's a short book, you said.
Yeah, it's only 70, 80 pages. Nice. Very, very short.
When was it published? Because I think it also seems quite ahead of its time in terms of dealing with that?
I actually have no idea. He wrote it quite late. I remember reading that. I think he was suffering. I think it was in his 60s, and then he would have written it after that. 1989.
89. Yeah, yeah. I think a book like that I read not too long ago was called The Unquiet Mind by a California academic, Redmond, I think her name was. Basically, her experience with manic depression, and she has quite a serious form of bipolar. But when she's a great writer and academic, and when great writers kind of contend with this topic, I don't really see other mediums for it. People can access information or guidance when dealing with depression in so many different ways. But, if you walk into a bookshop and you're confronted with a self-help section at a literature section, I don't know why you would ever go to the self-help, because it's not going to do anything, in my opinion.
Oh, no.
Literature and a serious writer definitely, who's going to give you an honest contention with an issue, and someone who's going to give you a bit of hope rather than trying to give you a bunch of pseudo-practical advice for stuff which is kind of just generalities and can't deal with the complexities of an actual person dealing with visible darkness or darkness visible is... I certainly turned to literature in that time, and I wish I'd probably had darkness visible, so I might even turn to it soon, because I've been meaning to actually read some proper Styron, because definitely doing my thesis on Baldwin and looking into Styron, he seemed like a quite exceptional man.
Yeah, I haven't read anything else of his, but very keen to dip into him when I next see him. And thanks for listening. Follow our Instagram, like and subscribe, all that nonsense.
Yep.
Send us an email. We'll probably read it.
I think we definitely will. We're that kind of desperate duo. Keen for any advice, suggestions on episode titles. As you can see, we're getting to the gist of this medium, and perhaps you think we're trying to do too much in each episode. You want more, you want less, you want it more listically, you want more like bam, 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 or you want more shorter lists and more depth. So if you've got any advice, let us know, because
let us know, yeah.
We're kind of...
ask us some questions.
Yeah.
We can answer them. We can do an episode on answers.
That's it. Talk about lots of things.
Yeah.
You want less books, more stories. You want more books, less Blake talking about his own neuroses. There's all sorts of advice.
I don't want to listen to those emails. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
I feel like we're on the same page.
We are.
Until next time.
Ciao.
All right.